2023. I'm Elizabeth Waits, a member of the code staff, and I'll be presenting presentations today for the matters that are on public hearing. We'll be viewing maps, photographs, and site plans of each of the proposed applications. Got a few preliminary announcements. One case on the docket has been withdrawn. That was case 2023-23, which is a request for a special exception to permit a daycare at 512 Rosebank Avenue. I don't know if anyone's here on that application, but if you are, it's been withdrawn. It won't be heard today. And you're welcome to stay if you would like, but that matter is no longer before the board. We do have a consent agenda today that we would like to recommend 2 cases for approval by the board, subject to the board's agreement. The first item is a case that's being recommended for consent with a couple of conditions that were recommended by the planning department. That one is case 2023-26. It's a request for a variance to permit a monument sign at 1131 4th Avenue South, zoned SP. The planning department recommended on approval on the conditions that site distance exhibits be approved by NDOT and that the permit be approved by the planning department. Is anyone here to speak in opposition to that request at 1131 4th Avenue South? Okay, seeing none. The other case that we would like to ask the board to approve on consent today is case 2023-27. This is a request for a variance from the side setback requirements to construct a carport over a portion of an existing driveway at 4301 Gray Oaks Drive, zoned RS20. The property has a 10-foot side setback, and the existing driveway encroaches at a diagonal between 5 and 9 feet into the setback. We understand there's no neighborhood opposition. Is there anyone who was here today wishing to speak in opposition to that request? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Chair and board members, if I could ask someone to make a motion to approve those items.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor of approving those items for the consent agenda, raise your hand and say aye. Okay, that passes. So those 2 go on the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you all so much. At this time, I'm going to read through a couple of instructions and some other preliminary matters. Mr. Chair, I don't believe I see any council members here with us today. Just wanted to make everyone aware then that for items, if there are parties here that wish to speak in opposition to an applicant's request, then both sides, both the proponents and the opponents of the request, will have 10 minutes in aggregate to make your presentation. So for parties that are wishing to speak in favor of an application, just be advised that everyone has a group 10 minutes to speak to the board in favor of that, and the applicants may also reserve a portion of that time to come back and rebut any of the testimony that's heard by the board in opposition to the request. All the opponents also have an aggregate of 10 minutes to speak to the board. So likewise, anyone who's wishing to speak against a request, you all might want to confer with one another to determine how you'd like to divide the time between yourselves. For cases where there is no one here to speak against the request, then the applicant will have 5 minutes to make your presentation to the board, and the board may also ask questions of the parties who come before and speak to them as well. The Metropolitan Code requires 4 votes to grant an application. If once a vote is taken on each of the applications today, any party who disagrees with the outcome may request a rehearing within 60 days. Parties may also appeal a decision to the Davidson County Chancery Court by filing a writ of certiorari within 60 days. All parties are encouraged to seek independent legal counsel before filing an appeal to ensure that all deadlines and procedures are met. Whenever we call up each case this afternoon, if you're one of the parties that's speaking, first we'll have the applicants and any parties in favor of the request to speak. then the opposition, then in your rebuttal testimony. When you come up to this table here to make your presentation to the board, please just push a little button that looks kind of like a person. The red light will turn on like this. You can begin making your presentation, and if you would please just state your name and address before you get started. That will help us know exactly who's coming before the board to speak on each of these cases today. With that, if there are no other preliminary matters this afternoon, then we'll go ahead and get started with calling our cases on the regular agenda. Thank you. Announce to take like a 2-minute recess and then we find out for sure. Okay, everyone, sorry. We're just taking a quick little interlude here. If everyone would just hang tight, we'll get right back started.
I swear to God.
Okay, appreciate everyone's patience very much. We had one item that would have been offered for consent approval this afternoon. We had some parties that came in, had questions, has had an opportunity to speak with the representatives for the application, and at this time, there is no opposition, as it turns out. So if I could ask the board to consider one more item for approval on consent. That item is case 2023-30. Now, of course, just to reiterate to the board members, if anyone has questions and prefers to hear an item, then you may do so. Please let us know. This case is case 2023-30. It's a request for a variance from the maximum height requirements for property located at 1301 Lebanon Pike, zoned RM40 ANS. Metro Code permits a maximum height of 45 feet in the Build-To zone in this zoning district. You all have received renderings that show a bump out dormer that would sort of intrude into that to a limited extent. Are all of our board members comfortable with presenting this case for consent? And is there anyone here who was wishing to speak in opposition to this case today? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Chair, if I may ask one of the board members to make a motion to approve this item on consent.
Make a motion, we approve it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, okay. So that goes on consent too.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll show that item as being approved. Okay. Doesn't work. Okay, there we are. So returning back to cases on the agenda. The first item for public hearing today is case 2023-22. This is a request for a variance from the minimum parking requirements for Street Brothers Seafood and Grill, located at 540 Paragon Mills, zoned CS. The Metropolitan Code requires at least one parking spot per 100 square feet of building space to operate a restaurant at this property. The structure on the lot is 2,872 square feet. with parking bonuses applied, there are 23 parking spots required. This time. Oh, I see. Thank you. Okay, I have to apologize to our audience again. We're having just a little technical glitch with our PowerPoint and projector, but we'll be right back. If I may go ahead and ask, is anyone here to speak in opposition to this request? It's the restaurant at 540 Paragon Mills. Okay, I don't see anyone. If you all would like, or whoever from the applicant group would like to come forward. Yeah, I think we're about to turn it back on, please. Yes, you may come up to the table and we'll get started as soon as this projector's working again. Thanks.
Sir, give us just a second. We're going to try to get the system working. We're back. This is the zoning map of this area. Thank you. Zoned CS. You can see that it's near the intersection with Nolensville Pike. This is an aerial view. Photos of the property now. This is a street view, so on the top photo, it's looking toward the light at Nolensville. And then on the bottom, we've got a photo depicting the creek that's referenced on the western part of the property. And then this is the site plan that the applicant has submitted. And at this time, if you'd state your name and address, and you'll have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Hi, my name is Koi Bowie. I'm one of the owners of Street Brothers Seafood. Pretty much I'm just asking for a parking variance so that I can, start serving alcohol and liquor. I don't know what else to say. That's what I'm asking for.
What's your hardship?
Hardship, pretty much our customer is coming in asking us if we're able to serve beer, because our seafood is pretty much the seafood restaurant, and they would like to have alcohol while they're eating their food. And right now, we don't have that option for them, and it's kind of costing us we're losing customer because of that.
So you have 23 parking places now, but to get the liquor license, you got to have 6 more. That's what?
Yes, correct.
Actually, they have 15, is my understanding. They need 23.
Oh, so it's
Yes.
15 to 23. Okay.
Yeah, we have parking in the back for the staff, as you can see in that little corner back there, but we don't have it drawn out. So pretty much the customer really don't park in the back of the building.
So you've got to get a liquor license, you're 8 parking places short. Is there any way, and you submitted one site plan, it's pretty rudimentary. I think what we'd probably like to know is there not the ability to put in any additional parking?
No, we don't have any additional parking because there's a creek in the back. And there's, if you could go back to the site plan on the left.
Can you go back to the overhead of the site?
Yes. So if you see where there's that parking, on the left-hand side on the first building,
Back one more if you would. That one there, perfect, yeah.
there's a veterinary, hospital that's there. But we usually don't get business into after hours. And he did approve that we can park there, and where that pawn shop is right behind our building also. He pretty much let us park there also.
Well, so, okay, let me see, do you see where it looks like you've got some kind of food trailer parked there on the side?
Oh, yeah, we moved that out the way. That's just
Okay.
parking there for the
And so
meantime.
are the 15 places that you have, are any of those in the back or are they all in the front?
It's parking in the back also, in the back
Yeah,
of the
and
building.
that's part of the 15?
Yes, sir.
How many parking places do you have out back?
Roughly, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We could park 7 in the back and 8 in the front.
Okay. And it looks like there is some,
Additional
I can
side
kind of
parking.
see where the creek goes through, but it looks like there might be some area there where you have something stored. It looks like maybe it's a blue tarp, or is there not room to put any more parking in between where the parking you have now in the creek?
No, no parking. Because there's pretty much trees and everything back there. There's a creek.
Were you able, you said that a couple of your neighbors said that you could use their parking lot after hours?
Yes, ma'am, after hours. So they shut down at 5 o'clock in the evening. So
Did they
that's,
submit anything for you, like in writing, so that we could see that?
I think the pawn shop, I don't know, we have that sent in. I can send it over later. I
Okay,
don't have anything with me.
okay.
Is one of those persons Mr. Walter Clark?
No, not Mr. Walter Clark.
Where is his place? Because he's written in it.
It's the corner building right there.
Which one?
It's the one on the corner. That's a veterinary
That
hospital.
office.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Where you see the 4 cars parking,
That's where his place is.
that's where it's parked. Yes, sir.
And so you're not counting him as
No.
one of the neighbors that has said you can use their parking after hours?
Yes, sir.
You're counting, I guess, the
The pawn shop.
business right next to it.
Yes, sir.
And whose business is that?
Um,
What's his name or her name or? What kind of business is it?
it's a pawn shop.
Pawn shop? Okay, any further questions?
Have you tried to work with, I'm actually I'm a customer of the vet next door, so I'm pretty familiar with the location here. Have you tried to work with the vet office to kind of come to some agreement, or do you have a way that you can propose that won't be a nuisance to them to
Yeah, we try not to
operate?
park there during his working hours because he's limited to parking space also too.
Yeah,
So we try to respect his space, and then when, pretty much, we're not really busy during the day, lunch, but after hours, we do get full. That's usually the time he closes, and then on weekend, he closes on weekends.
yeah.
So I pretty much just try to clean up his property as much as possible, if there's any trash.
Sure. Okay.
Any more questions? Okay, we'll close the public hearing and discuss. Thank you.
Oh, I typically don't like reduction of parking cases just because I think parking is such a premium. But it does sound like he has a hardship with the creek, and it does sound like he's tried to work with his neighbors. None of his, normally people, we've seen a bunch of these where surrounding businesses would send in opposition. It seems like he has a good relationship and may be able to work out getting those extra 6 spaces by working out an agreement with his neighbors. And so I'm more inclined to support it for those reasons.
Yeah.
But I'm still listening, so if you guys have something else.
I think as well, I mean, this building was built well before there were any kind of anywhere towards the regulatory environment there is around creeks and streams today, especially in regards to parking and trying to, so, I'll put it this way, you couldn't build this like it is today. And so I think, and you definitely couldn't add parking to that they're existing. So I think there is maybe a hardship there to the unique characteristics of the lot.
Yeah, my initial concern was when I saw the opposition from the neighbor, it referred to him as a doctor, and I couldn't quite tell if this was like some sort of 24-hour type medical clinic, which would have made me a little more nervous. But, given that it's a veterinary clinic that's closing conceivably during ordinary business hours, where there's not going to be like a potential lot of cars that are there, and that alleviated that sort of one concern that I had with the paper. So
The only concern that I have is just there's a lot of things going on right here. You can't tell it quite. I mean, this is a very, very heavily trafficked portion of Nolensville, and there is, I mean, just even, and I think probably part of the nuisance to Mr. Clark that wrote in is the fact that he's right on that corner, and there's always, I mean, it's a nightmare kind of traffic wise around there. So it could be that, having spillover parking could even prevent his people from getting on and off the site, which is not the, well, I guess if there is spillover, parking from the restaurant, then that could contribute to that. But at the end of the day, I do see a large amount of surface parking all around this area, and that I don't see why, with different places operating different hours, I do see a hardship there. I don't see that as being something that I can't overcome.
yeah, because the other issue is like just ultimately people have to police their own parking lots for parking. And I mean, if the vet has a desire to be aggressive about keeping people from parking there, then I think that's sort of on the neighbors to do that. I think that there is some acknowledgement, I think, in the opposition that upon request, when they had asked about having their staff not park there and park instead behind the building, they complied with that. So, I mean, I think there's, ultimately you can't control everything your customers do. And so, yeah, well, I guess I'll take a stab at a motion unless Mr. Wallace.
What I heard was primarily an economic request so that they can get a liquor license and increase their profits. Now, increasing profits is a wonderful thing in my mind. However, there are regulations and there are limitations imposed. And are we looking for a solution to an issue that really, I mean, Metro sets forth the limitations, the legislative body, we don't. Now I'm just having a difficult time because it's primarily economic on the request, and that's what the hardship is.
Well, I think that through the documents that are in the record, I think there is information showing that there's a creek that runs alongside and behind it and a slope there. So that's I was kind of in the same boat that you were in, but looking at it from a geographic standpoint was one thought I had, was that if this were just a flat piece of property and that were the case, I'd probably be with you on that, but I just don't see how they even potentially, without tearing down a portion of their building, how they would add parking.
Well, I'm not sure about that. And if they were requesting a variance to build something, I'll tell you, I would want to see better plans and I want to see something from a professional because it looks like there might be room back there where the trees are to put something else in. But I have always thought about these parking cases with businesses that it's kind of self-regulating because if you don't have enough parking, people are going to pull in and they're going to leave and they may not come back. So I'm always a little bit, I just feel like if you're running a business and you want to take the chance of it not having enough parking, that it kind of works itself out. So I'm not going to treat this like I probably would. If they were wanting to build something, I think I'd want to see more of a site plan. I might want to hear from an engineer or somebody about can they put anything back, any more parking in, but I'm okay with it as for those reasons. If they don't have the parking, I think it's going to hurt them. So I think they're going to be motivated to have it.
Sounds like Dave's gonna make a motion.
I mean, I can. I'll make a motion that we approve the variance from the parking requirements as requested due to the presence of the creek and the slope of the lot creating a unique circumstance such that strict compliance with the code would not be possible.
I'll second it. Okay, there's a motion and a second to approve. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So that's 4 for, and 2 against, so that passes. Okay, your application was approved. Yeah.
Our next item is case 2023-28. This is an item A appeal or an alternative request for a variance from height, maximum stories, and building coverage requirements. It's also a request for a variance from the garage door placement requirements for property located at 100 McKinnell Drive, zoned R6, in a contextual overlay zoning district. This is the zoning map of the area. And then this is the map including that contextual overlay district. This is an aerial view that these images are taken by the property assessor's office. So that structure that's there is no longer present. McKinnell is the road that's sort of horizontal, and then to this side we've got Porter Road nearby. This is an aerial view of the other side of McKinnell going up toward Riverside, which is the vertical street there. This is a photo of the site as it exists now. So these are the structures in question. Street view. And this was the site plan that was approved for the building permit issuance. I believe we have some additional records that I'm going to pass out to you for the applicant's case. And is there anyone here that wanted to speak against this request today? Okay, if you all just give me a moment, I'll let the applicant decide if you'd rather go ahead and get started while I'm passing these out, or you can wait until I'm done.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Actually, members, this is being an item A case and a variance. We'll need to hear the item A first, and usually in those I'll go first and kind of explain, hey, here's what happened and my determination, and I'll yield the balance of my time.
And so before you start, can I kind of see if I have this laid out?
Sure.
So there's an item A request with respect to the building coverage, the height, and the number of stories. If we find the zoning administrator errors, then we don't have to consider a variance for that.
Correct.
Okay. if we do find the zoning administrator erred, then the applicant is requesting a variance for the coverage, height, number of stories.
Got it backwards. If you uphold my determination,
If we uphold your determination, then they're
a
requesting.
variance request for all three items.
And then regardless of how the item A turns out, you're requesting a variance to build a garage in the front, correct?
That's correct.
And that's not connected to the item A at all?
No, not.
No, the item A is just on the height and the building coverage.
Thanks, I just wanted to make sure we got that laid out so that.
All right. Thanks, guys. I'll go and start my time here. So this case is before you, based off an issued permit in which I placed, and ordered a stop work notice on. The zoning division of my office reviewed this case and made a determination at that time, which I believe to be an error, that the homes just to the immediate west that are here were included in and which would be just to the left of the subject site here, were to be included in calculations for determining the allowable square footage and height on the subject property. The subject property is the last property, and I don't know if Elizabeth, if you could pull up parcel viewer.
Yes, thank you. And I also apologize
No,
to you for forgetting that you needed to make your presentation first. Okay, which view?
No worries. If you could, maybe you might have to open a web page to go to parcel viewer, and I'll show you. I'll show you guys the boundary of the contextual overlay district. But this parcel is the last parcel in the contextual overlay district on this side of McKinnell. On the south side of McKinnell, the COD runs all the way to Gallatin Pike. There we go. So from this view, you see the subject property in red. That's the last house in the purple shading. The purple shading is the contextual overlay district. In this, and I've advised my staff post this issuance, but previous to today, that for making determinations within a contextual overlay district, you should only use the parcels within the overlay district itself to make that determination. The thought being, we don't need to grab parcels outside of the area that the council intended to have an overlay to make rules for inside the overlay. So let me read to you, and the code talks about specifically the code section here. So you've got that for reference and for the record. But the contextual overlay district does
And
not.
also, those code sections are in the packet submitted by the applicant. I don't
Yes.
have the page, but they're in there, so.
They are, and it's section 1736, 450 and through. But and I will admit to the applicant, I've told the council members and the council that this ordinance does not specify that. So under the powers of the zoning administrator, one of the things I have to do is interpret the code and enforce the code as sort of getting the legislative intent of the council. Like, what did you mean? This is clearly what they meant to do in this case. But for us, it says that the minimum talking for height and maximum building coverage. And I'll cover building coverage first. It says 1736 470C. The maximum building coverage, excluding detached garages and other accessory buildings, shall be the maximum of 150% of the average of the building coverage of the two abutting lots on each side. When the abutting lot is vacant, the next developed lot shall be used for that. And where there's only one abutting lot in the same block face, it shall be used for this calculation. So how this should be applied in this case is that the subject property should have used the two parcels east of that to make that determination, to determine what height and what building coverage. I'll skip reading from the height section, but it says exactly the same thing, that we use the two abutting lots. So in this case, our staff erred in doing the adjoining abutting lot to the west, which is outside the coverage. If you do agree with the applicant, these houses comply with that calculation. So if you do grab the, and Elizabeth, if you can switch over to that aerial, that pictometry, yeah. So those two structures in the foreground were outside the overlay, were built previously. Those, if added to the calculations, what the appellant is building on site complies. And that was the basis at which the zoning examiner originally issued the building permit. What the examiner should have done was taken the two houses on the right and the next house east, just off the frame here, to make that determination. I will note for the record, the council is looking at specifically putting that language in the code and amending this code to reflect that, but that was clearly their intent in setting up overlays. And it makes sense if you think about it. If you're going to create a geographic area of things, here's how you do it in this geographic area. You shouldn't grab stuff outside the geographic area to affect the stuff inside the geographic area. It just seems kind of a mistake to do so that way. So that's ultimately the determination before you today is whether I, through staff, erred in this case. That the code is clear; it does not specify to use those to use outside parcels, to not use outside parcels of the overlay. But
It does not specify that, is that?
no, sir, that's correct. There's nowhere in the overlays language.
And is that also, I mean, I guess this code part, that is specific as to contextual overlays? The 17.36.470B, what you just read?
Yes, sir. That's just specific to a contextual overlay district. And kind of, if you read back, kind of going back to the purpose and intent section of the contextual overlay at 1736.450, it says the contextual overlay district provides appropriate design standards for residential areas necessary to maintain and reinforce an established form or character of the residential development in a particular area. That's all that says. So the council is going to amend and add a sentence that you should only use the areas inside the overlay. But I'm reading into that, making an inference that this is clearly what they intended to do. And so I've directed staff accordingly going forth, hey, be sure that we're only doing it this way. But to say, I just want on the record that nowhere in the code does it say that. This is falling, in my opinion, under the zoning administrator's interpretation of the code section. So that's really my presentation in chief.
Any questions for Mr. Hargis before we go on to that?
Mr. Hargis, you said that you would take the two to the, looking at this picture to the right of
Yes,
the property. Wow, but the second one would not be abutting this property at that point. So would you only take just the one to the right?
Admittedly, abutting is not the word that should be used in the code. When planning staff directed throughout this amendment to do that, all the pictorial examples and examples they use show the two next lots, and they use the term abutting. Abutting by definition means touching.
Right. That's
They
what
should
I'm
have said
thinking,
two
yeah.
adjacent
If
parcels.
I read that, I would think it's just the one.
It's just the one that's touching. Yes,
Well, if it was just the one that's touching it, would what they have comply?
no,
Okay.
not all. Not all. The addition of the next parcel over the adjacent parcel, that has also been a statement I made to the council members that, hey, while we're at it, let's use the correct phrase. I know what you meant, because all the pictorial through this intended adjacency, but it actually only has a single structure on it. It's much smaller. It actually bring the number down if we were to use that. So,
And then does the rear property factor into that calculation as well?
does.
Okay.
It does, because for us, and it's important for this board to know, and others outside that may be watching, horizontal property regimes or divisions of HPRs like these, both on the west and the east, are not divisions of property, but divisions of ownership interest. So there's not a true property line that's been cut through these parcels. It is a misnomer, largely I see in the real estate community, that says, oh, there's two lots here, or two. That doesn't exist. That's a legal fiction, but well, Mr. Trepper may say, I'm probably using the wrong term there. It's not a fiction, it's a real thing. But some people think in those HPRs, they divide up limited private elements, and some people feel that's mine and that's yours. But we have to educate people on our end. From our world, the whole is what you guys together jointly own in common.
And Mr. Hargis, aren't corner lots treated as being on the block face basically of both sides? Because as I know the figure that's included in the definition of the term lot, it shows basically that the residence that's here at 94 McKinnell, that essentially from there to the red property line of 100 McKinnell would be treated as a side setback, right?
On the,
Between the property line for 100 McKinnell and that's a side setback, correct?
correct, yes.
Okay, and then on the Porter Road side of this lot here, going away. So essentially, the way, as I read the diagram that's included in the definition of lot, is that essentially there's two side setbacks and two front setbacks when you're looking at a corner lot and how that's treated, right?
Honestly, no. And in the pictorial, yes, that is what's depicted. The policy has been from day one of this code to So we've got kind of overriding principles. You've got the narrow lot. So when I have a corner lot, the narrowest street is deemed front for determining the house is supposed to face the shorter lot line of the two. So by zoning code definition, the opposite line in this case would be the eastern property line of the corner lot should be a rear setback. And that's how our office enforces rear setbacks on corner lots. And then the adjoining street would be a side street, which depending on when that lot was created, may have some setback reductions in it. And then on our corner lot, that northern property boundary of it would be its only side yard. But you are correct that the graphic depicts those as two streets and two sides, but the application of it I tell you, from being here day one of this ordinance was never, we've enforced it differently than the text is written out. Both from Mr. West's time here and the prior zoning administrators before me, we've all consistently applied it the same way. Not that there's a setback issue here. Physically setback, these structures are fine. But for us, the issue in our case is that the inclusion of the larger structures at the corner lot skews the numbers up, which if you agree with the applicant, and again, I'm just laying out kind of, here's what the code says. It doesn't say I can't use those, but from an enforcement standpoint, it really shouldn't. These two structures are compliant if you include those, both height and square footage. The third issue, which is a separate kind of subcase, depending on the outcome of this one, is the garage door orientation. There's a prohibition on the garage door orientation facing the street. So like in this picture here, the back house of this one, if this were in the overlay, that would be a violation. That garage door facing McKinnell would be a violation. But because it's not in the overlay, it's fine.
Any more questions?
So what I am hearing is that you're suggesting a strict interpretation?
I guess I would say, yeah, if I had to characterize it that way, the strict interpretation of, hey, you should only count the stuff in an overlay for an overlay, although it's not expressly saying that here. I assure you future overlays will expressly say that. I've had that discussion with the planning department and the council members too that want to do these overlays. Be sure we're only talking about this geographic space, and it helps my examiners know what rules to apply when. So I will concede the point to the applicant if he raises it. I may pre-raise it for him, but it does not say not to count that. I've admitted that. I've told the council member this too, but anyway, that's how we've applied it going forward.
So let me ask the board, before we move to the applicant's 5 minutes, what we have here is we've got to first resolve an item A matter, and then we'll either have one or two variance items to deal with. Do we want to, and the zoning administrator can weigh in if I'm procedurally off base, but do we want to allot 5 minutes and deal with the item A, and because we're going to have to vote on that before we go to the next thing, and then have another 5. There's no opposition, so we'd only be given 5 minutes for the variances. I frankly think we'll probably need it. And if we don't, we don't, but it will certainly make it easy for my simple mind if we get the item A out of the way and then deal with it.
Yeah, in terms of treating this almost like a bifurcated,
Is that okay? We're not violating,
I think you're fine in doing that. And I think it's prudent to do so in an instance like this. Because if you hold me, then he does have a variance
opposition
request.
from?
No opposition.
So you'll have 5 minutes and then we'll vote on the item A matter, and then we'll move into the variances. So.
If I can ask, is the zoning examiner, the zoning administrator, sorry, Mr. Hargis?
Yeah.
I think I may have misspoken on the time, because at that time I had also forgotten that you should make a presentation first.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, normally in an item A case, because I'm technically the opposition, or he's technically the opposition, maybe we'd have 10 minutes to split up our case. Sorry not to extend the period, but I'm done with my portion, so I'll turn it over.
Okay, so we're
back to
ready for the
Mr.
applicant
Dickerson
for
here.
5 minutes, and then.
Alex Dickerson, Thompson Burton, 1801 West End Avenue, here on behalf of the appellants. Mr. Hargis summarized the case very well, I think. We have 3 requests before the board, 2 of which are item A's. on his interpretation of the properties that's to be used for purposes of determining height and building coverage. For those not familiar with this area, this is part of the westernmost part of the contextual overlay that basically straddles Riverside Drive. It's an area that over the past 5 years has grown in terms of infill and density from single family to a lot of two-family lots. You can see behind it the multifamily there also. So it's an area that's looking for increased density, gentle density we call it. My clients, they seeking to do the same for this property. They sought building permits. They built their buildings, the two primary structures in accordance with those permits. They're all the way past concrete footers, past framing. These are basically two roughed-in structures before the issue was recognized. They went back to codes to say, okay, we thought we were good. Codes reaffirmed that they were in good condition, and then later on there was the stop work order. So that's why we're here before the board today. In contrast to Mr. Lawless's question about the strict interpretation, I think that the appellant in this case has the strict interpretation. We are seeking that the board look at the contextual overlay ordinance strictly and not read in a requirement that only non-overlay properties or only overlay properties are to be considered. This particular ordinance is all about contextual overlays. It doesn't apply to a bunch of alternative design overlays. So if council had intended to exclude it, they could have put it in here. And I think the fact that they didn't speaks volumes. And the fact that they're seeking to amend it perhaps now speaks volumes. You can think of, contrary to Mr. Hargis's view about why you wouldn't include it, I'll tell you why you would include non-overlay parcels. In cases where you have a significant height difference or lot size difference bordering a contextual overlay, you might want to include those numbers so that you have a gradual change mid-block as opposed to a massive change when you go from the contextual overlay to another residence. Because the viewing public isn't going to know largely that there's an overlay that's causing that change. It'll just appear to be very abrupt. So we think it makes more sense to incorporate that corner lot. And as Mr. Hargis said, if you incorporate the corner lot, my client's structures are in compliance in both the height, max height and max building coverage. If you exclude it, they're not. I'll point out that the site plan that I showed you highlighted, you'll see the math that we did using the corner lot and the two properties to the right of the lot at issue. Even if you included the lot above the corner lot there on Porter, we would still be in compliance. If you removed, as Mr. Newton was saying, if you remove the two lots over lot, that's the shortest one. And so again, that would still put us into compliance. So the only way you take us out of compliance is to remove that corner lot. And so we understand that there's an intent that the zoning administrator is reading in, and perhaps council can rectify that with some clear language in the future. But by strict guidelines, there's no reason to read a requirement into this that only contextual overlay properties are to be considered. And the zoning administrator has admitted to you here that there's nothing in the code that that requires that non-overlay properties be excluded. So I think that speaks volumes as to the outcome in this case that is correct.
Okay, any questions about the item A matter for Mr. Dickerson? Okay, well, we will close the public hearing on the item A and discuss, and we'll come back to either one or both variances. So, thoughts on the item A matter?
I mean, I think if council intended for only the overlay properties to count, then council should have included only the overlay properties counting in the text of the ordinance. And I think, if there's a concern about, this being used to dilute an overlay, as I understand it, they could always go through through planning to reset where the overlay is and frankly start it at the neighboring property here if because of this drafting snafu. I understand the use of intent, but at the end of the day, we ought to be able to look at an ordinance, read it, look at, it defines abutting. The text of it identifies that, this is an abutting lot, and So it should be used in the calculation in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously not an attorney, but if I was looking at the code and I was trying to look through the requirements for property, I would have assumed that the next lot is abutting. I mean, there's, so, I may not know all the intent of all the council people, but just from looking at the code, that's what it looks like. So I have to agree there.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it particularly strikes me that it's in the contextual overlay part. If it had been in more of a general, I don't know, some part that wasn't specifically in reference to contextual, and I don't know whether they missed it or not. I just don't know. I mean, Mr. Hardis thinks they did. I think that's a very sustainable argument. I also think Mr. Dickerson's saying maybe, it's also sustainable argument that they did it on purpose because they want to blend the contextual overlay with the non-contextual overlays. And I don't know, but it's just not in there, is where it kind of is for me, so. Well, I will make a motion if there's no further discussion. I will make a motion that the zoning administrator erred on this item A matter.
I'll second the motion.
There's-
Unless, Peyton, you want to, and I'll be more than willing to defer to you, sir.
No, I'll let you be the strict constructionist, seconder here.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? Okay, so we've got 4-2, so the item A, item A, you succeeded on, so we'll move into the variance. So that means you just have one variance at this point, right, Mr. Dickerson?
That's correct.
Okay, do you need to go back over any of the presentation slides before you start your presentation, or I guess I should ask that to Ms. Waits. Do you want to go over anything before we start with the applicant?
Oh, I'd be happy to show any photos, again, that
Sure.
anyone likes. I don't think that I have anything that was particular to the garage door orientation.
Okay, so you have 5, and there is no opposition. Let me just confirm that to this matter. Okay, so you've got 5 minutes.
And I'll just go ahead and incorporate in the record, since these are separate hearings, what I said before about kind of the background and how we got to the place of 2 essentially finished structures. Part of the finished structures, as you can tell from the photographs, includes the fact that the garage doors are facing toward the street. And the contextual overlay requires that they be side-facing or rear-facing. So we're seeking a variance based on the hardship of the lot size. So as you can tell from the diagram that's showing right now, it's a standard width lot frontage, but it narrows significantly to the rear of the property. It also doesn't end in an alley, so there's no ability to enter through an alley space. It just ends at the other property line. That would make a side-facing or rear-facing garage for Unit B, which is the one toward the rear of the property, if you look at the diagram that we submitted, physically impossible to have a turn-in or a side or rear-facing garage.
So let me stop you there, Mr. Dickerson, for it. So don't forget. So what if you just were building one unit? How would you have enough for a side or rear?
I think with the setbacks, it would probably be a tight fit to go through down the side and do a button hook into the rear facing. But I have some staff here who may be able to clarify that.
Sure.
I'm Carrie Stephen Hagan, 232 Williamsburg Circle in Brentwood.
Okay, when you speak, ma'am, if you'll be sure and hit the.
Serena Walker.
There you go, okay.
I think you could fit one structure and possibly have a side load. However, I think the investor thought this as a R6 lot, and the square footage does fit into building 2 structures.
Okay, I got you there, but it would be possible. And the reason I'm asking is I think probably some board members are gonna, including myself, I mean, I've noticed you are putting 2 units here. And that's why I'm asking, if you were just putting one, could you do this with a rear-facing garage?
Yep. So we were the design firm hired to do the plans for the 2 houses for the investor. So we were asked to do 2 structures, and that's
Okay.
what we did. Yeah.
So does the unit B, does that, just looking at your plan here, it looks like you have, the garage kind of coming in from the front on that one?
Yes. so
Okay,
Unit B is,
Right,
just
the rear
over a little bit.
Right.
So you can access the garage.
so if you had the garage door for unit A directly across from unit B, would that work? Because if you can turn cars into unit B, I'd assume you could turn cars into unit A, is that correct?
Well, I think, so each structure has to have 2 parking spots. And
Right.
so Unit B couldn't have a car parked in front if Unit A had a garage right there. Because then they couldn't
Doesn't
pull
the
out.
garage count as 2 parking spaces?
No, it's a 1-car garage.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I think I read in the packet, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that the plans were approved as having front-facing garages, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And they were,
And to this point, yes,
Okay.
of construction before we got a call on it.
okay.
And that was a lot of construction, it looks like, looking at this picture that's up.
That is, yes, that's
Yeah.
how it stands.
That's when you got the stop work order.
Correct.
Okay.
And just, I don't know if you can pull up on the map, but across the street, there are other houses with front-loading garages that were built prior to the contextual overlay. So it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be, the only house or the only structures on that street that have front-loading garages.
Had any representatives of the codes department been out to the property between the time when the plans were approved and when the stop work order was placed?
Well, we got the, what was the question, sorry?
Sure, I can confirm that. There would have been inspections at the framing stage and the foundation.
Okay, so basically, I guess what the point I'm trying to get at, there would have been opportunities throughout the construction process for
That's
codes
correct.
to have discovered.
For sure.
Okay.
Well, we even got a call, my husband did, he's the builder, and the building inspector called and said that there had been a call. So him and I went down to the codes office for a second time and met with another zoning examiner, not the one that had issued a permit, and he didn't see any problems either. So we're like, thank goodness, continue construction, and that's when we got a stop work order. I think it was like a week or 2 after. So 2 times it was kind of, overlooked or just, on our part, obviously it was overlooked, and then zoning, and then also on the surveyor, the site. So,
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming up and answering questions.
And I'll go ahead and add that I can have them come testify about this, but I've spoken with my clients and they said it's not economically feasible to move the front-facing garages to the rear for either unit based on how far they are in completion. They feel like they'd need to raise it and rebuild in order to do that.
And that's your exceptional circumstance. You've got a hardship argument that you're also arguing the exceptional circumstances based on the approval.
That's correct.
Okay. Questions? Okay, we'll close the public hearing and discuss.
I'm kind of torn on this because, you could definitely have designed it to have the garages in the right way, but it's been through multiple levels of review and approval to get to this point. So, I do see that as an exceptional circumstance that warrants a hardship there, because, that's, there shouldn't be front-facing garages here, and I think everybody realizes that. And there is a way to make it so there are not front-facing garages, but if you have a permit approval and you have a framing inspection, you have all these things that say you're good to go, then you should be able to rely on that. So I'd see that as an exceptional circumstance.
I'm going to echo what Mr. Newton said. Because it makes me really uncomfortable when people tell me that design choices are hardships. Those aren't hardships. Now, I understand the stuff that codes did that sort of led to detrimental reliance, so I know where our chairman is going and where, so, and
You
so
can
for
see me
that
nodding my
reason,
head.
for that reason, I will likely support it, but I don't like, for instance, like saying, I mean, if you look at this property, like had one home on it before, you knew there wasn't an alley when you bought it, so you made a choice to design it this way in light of the conditions that were super obvious at the time of purchasing and designing it. And so to come later and say, hey, those design choices are hardships, those aren't hardships. And so I'm gonna quote, certain horses aren't made for certain courses, because I think the course they went down, it wasn't made for that, but I understand the legal argument of our chair and, the head nod of our other colleague. And so for the legal reason of detrimental reliance, I will likely go with it, but it's like under protest.
Okay, well, that's a,
Bravo.
I second that, but that.
I think that, you know, I feel like my thing here now is beating a dead horse over when you're given assurances by a department or an agency of some kind that what you're doing is correct, that we should be able to rely on that. And, you know, with the understanding that mistakes occur, but at the same time, you know, this is a high burden for these folks to bear for the cost of that mistake. And so, yeah, but I don't really take a position on the design choice because that's my real wheelhouse of intellectual caliber. I rely on folks like Mr. Newton and Mr. Cole and the absent Ms. Carpenick for that. But yeah, 100% with you there.
okay. Anybody want to try a motion? Well, I'll make a motion that, that due to the exceptional circumstance of especially the progress of this building and the obvious amount of money that's been put into it, that at this point, that under exceptional circumstances, we should approve the requested variance.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Okay, so 3-3. Well, okay, let me make sure who votes for approval of variance. 3, all against. 3, so it doesn't pass and it comes back next meeting for a, do I have this right, Ms. Waits? It comes back next meeting for,
For Ms. Carpenick,
what's that?
for Ms. Carpenick to
Right.
render a vote.
Yep. Okay, you're welcome, yep. Okay, we've got, one more case.
Mr. Chair, we have a request from one of your board members.
We have what? Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely, yeah. We'll take a 5-minute break for sure, yeah.
This property still has an address of 0 Cabot Drive, so it doesn't have a postal address assigned to it yet. This is the zoning map of the area, and it's under the urban zoning overlay. Aerial view, you can see where the property abuts I-40. This is what the property looks like. It's a wooded area around a curve. Just some photos to illustrate that if you do like a close-up shot, you can see the interstate from the rear of the property. This is another view looking down the hills with the property on the right. This is the applicant's site plan. And in this case, the applicant is seeking variances from the rear setback and the parking requirements, and is also seeking a special exception from the street setback requirements. This property is zoned RM20.
Street setback in the front is the special exception.
Yes,
setback in the rear as a variance.
That is right.
Okay.
That is right. I know that we have some information in front of the board that somewhat conflicts with that, and that was something that I believe our group is prepared to address if you have questions. But yes, the street setback is special exception, variance to the rear. And I don't believe anyone is present to submit any opposition. So if you would like to come forward, please, and state your name and address, you have 5 minutes.
And so before you begin, let me just make a quick comment, because this is in one respect a case of first impression for this board as it relates to the parking variance. And I'm hoping, fingers crossed, you're not going to see a lot of these, but I have a feeling you may see these in the future. So the council recently amended the parking requirements inside the UZO to eliminate parking for uses other than 1 and 2 family dwellings, which was, some people love, some people don't like. But one of the potentially unintended consequences may be in this case as it relates to, because this parcel's in the UZO, the maximum parking, so let me recap. What the code now says is you can choose not to build any parking, but if you do choose to build parking, you can't build more parking than what the table in the parking table calls for. And if you do build more, then you start getting penalized for floor area ratio. So in this particular case, this is a multifamily development for us. The zoning code in multifamily inside the UZO requires a maximum of 1.5 spaces per unit, which in this case with 10 would be 15 parking spaces. The applicant wants 2 cars per unit. So this is why it's technically a variance from having too much parking. And I know that sounds weird, and it feels weird for me to say it, but it is actually the case. So the hardship standards in this case, is a little weird applying it to it. I'm just tell you, take it at face value. 2 parking spaces to this zoning administrator seems reasonable, but the code says, no, you can't do that inside the UZO. So y'all deal with that as you may. But this hopefully is not going to be a trend of parking variances coming to this board. If it does, I assure you there will be a text change coming as swift as possible to correct that, so we don't have a run on parking variances. But again, special exception for the front, rears, the thing. I actually spoke with the applicant because I told him that day, I'm like, I think you're our first case for this kind of appeal. Hardship shaped lot, whatever for the other portions. But with that, that's kind of my little commentary on this one. But didn't seem unreasonable to me. But I have to enforce code as they actually wrote it. So.
All right. Okay, we're ready for that. Yep.
Tyler Hawkins. I live at 1901 Warfield, or 1901A Warfield. I'm the owner at this property, 0 Cabot Drive. Thank you for hearing this today. I come to you with primarily a request of hardship. So I purchased the property several months ago. I work with Michael Garrigan at Dale and Associates. We've done quite a few properties together, and we've gone through probably 6, 7, 8 revisions of what this could look like or should look like given the neighborhood character and what makes the most sense for the surrounding area. As of right now, if I'm not granted a front setback or rear setback variance, I have to move all of the units to the back of the property. And because NDOT's only going to require me 1 in, 1 out, I'm effectively going to have a massive parking lot in the front yard. And then I have front-facing parking garages instead of rear-facing. Just from a looks perspective, does not bode well. Also, it just makes it difficult from a design criteria and a hardship really to get the density that the lot is zoned for. So right now it's RM20. Based on the measurements, I can fit 15 units. There's really no way to get 15 units on the property and make it look, have it make sense. The only way for me to even get close to the zoning density is I have to go vertical. So one of the other pieces that I submitted was a concept that Dale and Associates drew. It's 12 units. Again, it's not the zoning maximum of 15, but I have to go vertical, 4 or 5 stories to really maximize the zoning density, which, I really don't want to do, and it doesn't really make a nice project for me. So if I had to abide by the current setbacks and not have a hardship for just trying to get anything close to what is allowed by zoning because of the unique shape of the property, I would then be going down to 9 units, 0 garages, and street-facing parking. Again, that's another piece of the paper that I've distributed today. So there's a lot of constraints given the unique nature of the lot. There's also a drainage runoff that runs under I-40 that's from Nashville West. You can see it on the very right corner of this diagram. We're going to handle that by the 20-foot landscape buffer. So we're going to mitigate that rain runoff. I believe, and Joey can correct me, I believe the setback for RM20 on the side should be 5 feet. So I'm giving it 20 feet to mitigate that as well. So I'm trying to conform a lot with the unique characteristics of the lot. So it from our point of view, it makes it difficult to make something that's desirable and even gets close to the zoning maximum. So that's why we're requesting a variance for the front setback, rear setback, the parking variance, which was new to me until I talked to Joey. And also, we're only trying to build 10 units compared to the zoning maximum of 15.
So a question for you while this, the screen is up. The 300-foot right-of-way that's referenced at the very bottom there to Interstate 40, you see that? That's 300 feet from your property line down to the, okay. That's what
Yeah, there's no homes, there's no neighbors behind us. It's an interstate slope. It gets pretty drastic. So the interstate is back there, but because there's such a steep difference of grade from that property to the actual interstate, it does give a pretty good noise buffer, surprisingly. But yeah, there's no neighbors behind there.
Okay. Thank you. Any more questions from the applicant? Okay, we'll close the public hearing and discuss.
I have a question for Mr. Hargis on this. I was pretty shocked to see this is in the urban zoning overlay. Doesn't seem like a very urban site. So is this like right at the edge of it? Okay.
It is. It's not even, it's actually not in the West Nashville community plan. It's in the Bellevue community plan.
Yeah.
So I was surprised too when he came to see me that it wasn't in the UZO. That's what kind of prompted the special exception portion of this and I'm sorry, I didn't stop clock there. But yeah, I was surprised as well that this was in the UZO. It's almost as far west as you get.
Can I add something really quickly? I think it was in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, but basically that whole district, that whole council district got added into the UZO for this. It was primarily for sidewalk requirements.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So to me, when I was looking at this package, I mean, this is definitely, I don't even have to see the surrounding lots to know this is a very unusual slice of land. And when I looked at this, the thing that, I didn't have a problem with any of it. The thing I had the least problem with was the rear setback, because I thought, okay, there's 300 feet down to Interstate 40. It's not like there's an adjoining neighbor. And then we got planning's recommendation, and they say disapproval of the rear setback line, and their reasoning is that maintaining the required 20-inch setback will keep the existing tree canopy in place and eliminate noise. And I'm struggling with that because that tree canopy is on this property. So, I mean, I don't think the applicant has to maintain the tree canopy, and there's also 300 feet. That's why I wanted to confirm that it wasn't this way, that diagram is talking about this way. So that I'll just say that kind of threw me for a loop, that, and maybe somebody can.
I mean, I think it has a pretty good slope too. I think that was part of their recommendation was those trees and slope back there. I personally agree with planning's recommendation there because, I mean, the trees and the slope kind of help to separate this whole neighborhood, not just this particular lot from the interstate. I didn't have any issue with the front, special exception on the setback or the parking requirement waiver, variance. But yeah, the only one that I kind of had any issue with is the one in the rear of the 20 feet. I think that is there for a good place. And I can't speak to people's tastes, but if it was me, I wouldn't, and I was, wanting to live up, looking a place to live, I wouldn't want to live, right up against the Interstate 40, but, to each their own. But yeah, that was the only one that I saw that kind of was an issue there. I'm still listening to others' thoughts on that.
I live up against an interstate. It's, it's pretty loud, but it's sort of, frankly, I don't know in terms of the relative difference between being 7.5 versus 15 versus 20. It's sort of, there's a baseline level of it that's just going to be there. My bigger question was sort of how, and this is just how to weigh the variance factors in conjunction with the parking.
Well, I think that, a lot of the rationale behind the recent ordinance to make parking minimums, parking maximums was being part of the UZO was that it was accessible to transit and to sidewalks and all that kind of stuff, pedestrian accessibility. And when I look at the surroundings of this area, I don't see that pedestrian accessibility really in any way, and don't foresee that happening anytime soon. I think, maybe 60 years down the road, you might see that, but the life cycle of building is less than that. So typically the average life cycle. So, I know some of your, we've talked about some of the parking maximums and stuff before. But I do see there being a hardship here. Just with it, there's really the only way to get around this area right now as it's built is by a car. And there's not a lot of alternatives there.
Yeah, where I am is like, I think on this one, for me, the physical characteristic piece is that it is situated in a way that's not that, it's not such that you could have street parking or things.
Right, exactly, exactly.
That's kind of that's sort of where where I am on it, is that the nature of the property in the area is not one where, for instance, you could have 1.5 spots,
right,
but then all of a sudden you've got a whole street where someone could park in front of a townhome or whatnot. So I think that to me is sort of the circumstance here, and where I have comfort in seeing a real hardship with it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would echo that. Well, I think that there's some different thoughts on I think, the rear setback is kind of the one along I-40. I'm curious to hear others' thoughts on that one.
Yeah, it sounds like to me like that is the one sticking point maybe.
Yeah, it seems like people, I think, it sounds like, it's from what we've heard so far is that, there's not a lot of opposition to the parking or to the front special exception, but yeah.
Well, it looks to me like if we did not approve the rear setback, I'm no architect, but it looks like I can read a diagram. It looks like the applicant would lose 3 units, lose 1, 10, and 9, it looks like.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably true. Again, it gets down to, I'm not going to say it, but certain lots, I mean, is this a lot? I mean, it seems like a pretty funky lot. I mean, it is a funky lot. I mean, let's just be honest. It's a unique one. It has unique and special characteristics.
I think the only thing too,
Horses and courses.
well, and I think too, though, also, because if, if the thought was, okay, the side setback doesn't have to be as robust as what they're doing, but the reason they're doing the larger side setback is because of the stormwater issue. And so, ordinarily, I might say, okay, well then, if the stormwater issue weren't a thing, then you could maybe move those two rear units to the side and then comply with all the setbacks. But, I think as between being right there in the zone of the stormwater runoff and being close to the I-40 sound barrier, I mean, I think that the latter is definitely less of a problem than the former. So,
Well, another thing is, and I hear planning is saying essentially, we'd like to maintain the 20-foot rear setback because of it will help mitigate noise for other neighbors. But here's what I see. If we do maintain that, then you're not gonna have units 1, 10, and 9 there. And to me, I'm not an expert in sound, but they're gonna provide a lot of sound buffer. I would think probably more than cars. And if people will see buying a unit, it's not like they're gonna be tricked and say, oh, no, I bought a place and there's the interstate's right below me. I mean, I guess maybe if they come from California and buy it without ever looking at it, but now you can get on Google Earth, so anyway. But to me, it's, and I don't, so there's a.
It should not have smiled if you're talking about Californians.
Well,
But that's okay.
California, I wasn't picking on Californians. Wherever people come, they're welcome, but they do buy a lot of, I understand a lot of houses are being bought now without people. So, I mean, the 13-foot difference, to me, when you weigh, okay, if you take out some of the buffer, but you're putting in 3 units, if I were a neighbor, I think if I were looking for noise mitigation, I think I'd rather have some structure up there than some trees. But also, I get Mr. Newton's points about it too. I would say always, when somebody can take a really odd parcel like this and do something with it that creates housing, which we need in this town, I'm always kind of applaud that. And I think that, this is a pretty thoughtful design and they've tried to maximize the property and all that kind of stuff. So anyway.
I will admit that I probably would have been a whole lot happier if the applicant was saying, well, they're going to have a row of magnolias or pine trees or something to help mitigate that and help the air in the neighborhood. But that's not part of the request here. So, but I also think 300 feet is long ways. So I didn't have as much problem. I'm sorry, Mr. Logan. I just didn't have the problem with that part of it. And I was more aghast at the 1.5 parking place and penalizing if you have too much parking.
or I'm putting 5 trees in my yard today, so.
Thank you so much.
We can, the air will get a little better.
Then you're saving the planet. Thank you. So I don't have the same problems with the 300 feet. And absent my somewhat sarcasm, if someone's gonna, you've got really two large units, 9 and 10, that are gonna block a lot of the sound. I wouldn't want to live in them, but someone will. And if they have enough soundproofing in there, it may not bother them. And I don't live that far from an interstate. And I can still hear it, but you get used to it. Sort of like if you live on a railroad tracks, you get used, and you miss the train when you don't hear it. So I don't have a problem with the request for a change. So for what it's worth.
Ms. Davis, Mr. Cole, anybody want to weigh in?
I'm thinking along the same lines of Member Lawless on not taking issue to the rear setbacks. If someone wants to live there, let them have at it.
Okay, anybody want to enter a motion?
Well, the only other thing was, there was something in here, there was an NDOT condition. I don't know if is that?
Yes, they had requested a site distance exhibit, and the applicant has included that, so it is one of the documents that's
Okay.
before you now.
Okay.
Well, I'll make a motion then that, the special exception and the variance request be approved based on the hardship being the shape of the lot and I think it was the stormwater issue that, the applicant identified. There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Okay, that's none again, so,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, everybody, if we can just have a couple minutes
You're right, yeah, we
to
cannot
just
adjourn.
switch up on our tech, and
Yes.
then we'll get started with the ethics training to finish out the day.
Okay, so can we have a 5-minute break?
Yes. Adjourn our meeting and begin the ethics presentation portion of our training. Thanks.
All right. Hello. Thank you for your patience this afternoon. I'm Ann Mickelson. I'm your representative from Metro Legal. And we do ethics training for you every year or 2 years. And so this is your annual or biannual training. I know many of you are attorneys. This material will probably seem very familiar to you, but please, if you do have questions as we go along, please go ahead and ask. I've found that actually people bring up really interesting scenarios as we go through these presentations. So if you have something you want to kind of suss out with us, please do. All right. And I see one of your members, I believe, is terming out. He's excused. Then this should take, I think, about 20 minutes or so, 20, 30 minutes, just depending on how many questions we have. All right. Okay, so there are several goals for the training, and again, most of this will seem pretty familiar to you. So understanding that you can't accept benefits related to your role on the board or commission, understanding when you need to recuse yourself if you may have a bias or conflict, reminding you to disclose knowledge you received about an agenda item from outside the meeting, articulating specific reasons and the basis for your decision, and understanding the basic tenets of the Open Meetings Act and Public Records Act. So those are the main issues we're gonna go over. Okay. And the first issue is regarding benefits related to your role on the board. And this is where the Metro ethics ordinance comes in, and it applies to all Metro employees, including board and commission members. And there are a lot of shall nots, as you probably know. It's a very long ordinance, has a lot of provisions. I just highlighted a few here, which again are pretty much common sense, and which I think of in terms of the Twitter rule. Do you want someone tweeting about this? No, you don't. Accepting or soliciting any benefit that might reasonably tend to influence you to act improperly, using Metro property services or funds for personal purposes, using non-public information for personal gain, using your position to secure unwarranted privileges or exceptions for yourselves or relatives, accepting employment that might conflict with what you do here and in accordance with your board duties, accepting any benefit which you believe might have been granted to you, intending to influence any action taken here at BCA. And then the sort of more general one, giving a sort of reasonable basis based on your conduct for the impression that any person can improperly influence or unduly enjoy your favor. So those are sort of some of the big ones. There are, of course, exceptions to this rule, and a lot of it is kind of common sense. Of course, if their presents are given of trifling value, thinking of like a plaque, a picture that's framed, something along those lines. Of course, you have your private life. You can accept gifts or hospitality unrelated to your position at Metro. You can get birthday presents. You can receive meals, beverages, food, promotional items. It has to be a value of under $25 from a single source. And that's when we're talking about sort of in relation to something having to do with your Metro-related duties. And then the rule about admissions, tickets, that kind of thing. And that has a $100 cap. Okay, as you may know, there is a board of conduct that's created under the code that can hear complaints and render advisory opinions. So the complaints would be made to the Board of Ethical Conduct. The Department of Law investigates. The board decides whether to hold a hearing. And then there are various penalties, including censorship, resignation, referring the matter to the DA, or referring the matter to the Director of Law. Okay, any questions about that? Okay. Goal number 2, understanding when you may be biased or have a conflict. And I find actually lots of people have questions about this, but again, you all have been on this board for a really long time and you have a lot of experience with this.
You asking people to put trees in might get me in trouble with this.
To put trees in your own yard.
Oh, no.
Well, your duty of independence, right? So basically you can't act based on your self-interest or bias based on the interest of other persons, other parties. And you must be impartial. So a lot of people wonder about, especially people where there are a lot of boards and commissions that have fewer attorneys on them, wondering like, when do I need to recuse myself? When am I biased? And we always tell you, if you really have a question, a situation where you don't know what to do, just come talk to me about it and we can talk about it in advance of the board meeting ideally, not right before. And we can talk about, just go through all the facts and the factors and help you come to a decision there. So the most basic issue, right, is if you have some kind of financial interest. The next is basically a bias for or against a party. That means you can't be objective. And that includes like not only close friends and family members, but also like their business associates where you really feel that you're unable to be impartial regarding a decision. Like you might have, colleagues with whom you really can't, you've maybe as an attorney who comes here and you feel the nature of relationship with them is such that you really can't be impartial. You need to recuse. Though generally as a default, right, you have a duty to vote unless there's really a strong reasons for recusal. And then the duty to be impartial. And this is sort of tied up with that bias and prejudice. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Where this, not prejudging fact issues, but I guess what's the line there between like reading all of the document, reading the fact materials and,
right.
Your mind is naturally going to have sort of thoughts about what you've read when you come into the meeting.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, you wouldn't consider that to be as a...
Oh, no, that's part of your thought process, right? Is
right.
reading the materials and preparing for the meeting. You're actually obliged to do that.
Yeah, right,
So
exactly.
it would be as if, a certain kind of variance, you think, I just never grant that kind of variance,
Right.
ever, no matter what. Then you prejudge that, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, no, absolutely. Like case by case, yeah. I mean, you're supposed to come in here having read all that, yeah. I can't imagine what you do if you hadn't, because they're pretty voluminous materials and
Right,
pretty
it's just
very
like,
fact and dense,
it's like,
fact
well,
specific.
you have to, you
Yeah.
can't like go in blind and say, I'm only
Right.
going to hear what's in this,
Yes, no, that's a good question. All right. You don't have to recuse, right, if you don't have any kind of financial interest. If you do believe you can be objective. Sometimes there's situations where, like say you do know some of the parties involved, but you feel, hey, like I can be objective here. This is nothing that's going to bias me one way or the other. And that's fine. And those are often determinations you have to kind of make for yourself. But again, if you have questions about that, feel free to come talk to me. All right, so I was just trying to think of a couple like fact scenarios here, right? That had to sort of touch on both the duty of independence and recusal and also kind of touch on the ethics here a bit. Like if someone is coming and like taking you out to lunch because they really want to make sure BZA always like is thinking a certain way about certain kinds of issues, right? Issues that are definitely going to come before you, that would be a problem, right? And of course, you wouldn't do that. You would direct those people to, right? If it's a case-specific issue, we direct them to staff. Parties are not supposed to speak with you about any kind of pending case. Of course, you also can't accept gifts from parties. So if someone's taking you out to lots of fancy lunches and they're coming before you at BZA, we all know that would be an issue. So.
But like buying your own lunch and going to lunch, like I have a friend who has predated me being on this board, who's a lawyer that appears before this board a good bit. So that's kosher. Correct.
Yeah, well, you have a personal relationship with them,
I do.
right?
I mean, we don't talk about any board stuff.
Exactly. Like if you're not talking about board material, you have a personal life, you're allowed to have a personal life. It's just that if he's coming to you and saying, hey, I have a case pending before you, and by the way, I'm going to take you out to like the best steak in town, then we have a problem.
Yeah. Well, he's a former Metro employee, so I don't think he knows.
He would never do that.
He understands that very well.
Mm-hmm. Under $25.
The chili burrito on 4th Avenue where Mr. Poole and I will have lunch from time to time.
I also recommend chili burrito, yeah.
But that's because you don't get any tea or Coke to go with it, obviously.
Well, the fruit tea, you can still be on 20 above, yeah. Okay. Let's see. All right. Reminder to disclose knowledge you have received about an agenda item from outside the meeting. And this may happen from time to time in different kinds of contexts. If you need to disclose that knowledge or else you'll need to recuse yourself. Imagine in most cases you would be able to disclose that knowledge. If for some reason you can't, then recusal would be in order. So knowledge would include any attempts to lobby you outside the meeting. And again, this relates to that prior slide, avoid any ex-party contact with any party who's appearing before the BCA on any kind of pending matter. But relevant knowledge here, and I see this a lot on your board, right? You all bring in a lot of expertise to your work here. And so, when you talk about, why you're coming to a decision one way or the other, right? Often you're disclosing, we've had experience with this board before, right? I've seen this kind of case before. This is how we tend to treat these. I mean, all that kind of intellectual memory is really important. And so explaining all of that, imagining, many of you are attorneys, imagining if, thinking about the record you're creating as if it were ever appealed, right? If it goes up to a court, how they're going to look at this transcript and look at this record and how they want to understand your thought process. So, okay. All right, and this slides into the next topic of articulating specific reasons and the basis for your decision. And the acceptable reasons here, right, are the criteria and the relevant guidelines or laws, the facts presented at the meeting, past experience with similar issues, and studies by experts or specific observations. Unacceptable reasons, sympathy, right? And this goes back to the idea of bias, that you really just can't make a clear cut, decision here because you're sort of swayed by emotions. And opposition that is just kind of irrational, like, I really don't like it. I don't think anyone should build anything next to 440. It just offends me at every level, right? That would also not work. Okay. And one example I'm thinking of here is the variance. And I know this is a tricky one because there are a lot of factors here, right? But technically with the variance, right, you're supposed to go through and cite all of these criteria and have an affirmative finding of fact on each standard. And I do hear a lot of discussion here about specific factors in the variance, and under the ordinance, right, you are supposed to have those findings, and they're pretty specific. All right, the last big goal here is understanding the Open Meetings Act and how it prohibits outside deliberations, and the Public Records Act, which does make your emails and texts potentially public if they're responsive to a public records request. I always say that, if I were serving on a board, and I realize this is not always practical, I would actually just create a separate email account for my Metro business, just because you don't want to be necessarily in the situation of like having your personal or work emails mixed in with what's actually technically Metro public records. So, but then again, I understand that's also inconvenient and clumsy. It's just that you just have to be aware that, that there might be instances where you're called to turn over emails and texts, and that has happened in the past. So just to be aware of that. Also be aware of that, if you're using like a work email and there's some kind of like data retention policy where everything gets dumped every 30 days or something, then you're actually destroying like responsive public records potentially. So something else to keep in mind. Okay. But generally, of course, as you know, there should be no deliberations about anything that's BZA related outside the public hearing. So let's see. And the second is, going back to the email and private emails. Sorry. Oh yeah, so if there are any messages sent to you, yeah.
Sorry, this is probably a dorky government lawyer question
That's
for
okay.
another
I'm a
government
dorky
lawyer.
government lawyer too.
Is there a RDA for our records email? Basically, like, is there a records
Metro?
disposition authorization for Metro board records with the state Open Records Commission?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Well, the RDAs here are passed by the Davidson County Public Records Commission.
Okay.
But they're done by department. There is a general record schedule. Most email communications actually fall under being conversational and don't have to be permanently retained.
Yeah, I just am curious about like when you send out stuff really or whatnot, like what's the, what,
Yeah, I think those would be email communications. It falls under the general record schedule, and then my email, of course. I mean, I do retain those, and so it would be a record that would be available publicly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an excellent question. All right. Let's see. Okay. As you know, in terms of like what could happen here in terms of consequences, if there's a violation of the Open Meetings Act, then a judge might deem the deliberations void, order court supervision of a board. We would never want to have that happen. All right. What is a meeting? As you likely know, it just takes two to tango. Two is a meeting. When you're meeting and discussing, making decisions, deliberating towards a decision. So the exception is, of course, like meeting at Kroger, right? You're not actually there to discuss anything having to do with BZA. You just happen to meet, and that's fine. I'll talk a bit about exceptions in a second. But in terms of all meetings themselves, you need to have adequate public notice. And basically, there has to be, there's no like specific number of days, but generally it has to be sufficient under the circumstances to fairly inform the public. Okay. And also under the Metro ordinances, there's a requirement that there's like a policy of providing adequate notice of meetings. And I know Elizabeth takes care of that. And that's having your agenda and everything posted on the Metro webpage. Okay, what is not a meeting? On-site inspections. I don't know if you do that very frequently. I know some of the other boards and commissions do that. People will visit a site. Sometimes it's a prearranged site visit. Sometimes people just drive by to look at what the site looks like, and that would not be considered a meeting. Of course, if you were at a site and someone else on the board were there, you couldn't deliberate or have any kind of discussion pertaining to that particular site or case. The chance meeting, that's perfectly fine, but you can't use the chance meeting, you have met someone at Kroger, or you can't use that as an opportunity to say, hey, what do you think about that case we have coming up next week? Kind of a tricky one. That would be a problem. Attorney-client meetings, occasionally there are going to be times when there might be some specific legal issue and pending litigation, in which case we could have a closed executive session. All right, best practices for making informed decisions. So you've got a really great, strong staff here at BZA. So staff does an excellent job with providing the detailed agenda, providing you with all the packets, all the information you need. These are posted. They give you explicit recommendations. And I guess this is something that we haven't done here. I think it's fine to go not necessarily beginning meetings with conflicts and recusals. I think you can do that before a particular item. But, we can discuss it. But that's an issue. That's something we could talk about. All right. And just as a board member, I think a lot of you have been here for a very long time. So you're very familiar with the work of the department and the work of the staff. And if any of you are new, you'd want to make sure you did get to know your staff. talk to them about what they do, how everything works here, what the history of the board is, and just generally your kind of duty to be prepared and to show up having read all the materials and ready to make an informed deliberation. Okay, so that was pretty quick, pretty easy. I think all of you really know this material pretty well. If you have questions, again, feel free to ask me, and thanks for your attention. All right, yeah. It didn't take too long, right? It wasn't too painful. Yeah. Thank you. That's my job.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.